Welcome back to the Leadership Blueprint podcast. Today's guest is Brian Parsley, keynote speaker, leadership and sales culture expert, and co-founder of the Constant Group. Brian is the creator of the Human Factor, a framework focused on how people actually think, communicate, and perform under pressure. For over 2 decades, he's worked with organizations around the globe to build trust, improve leadership effectiveness, and drive predictable performance. In this conversation, we dive into human behavior, leadership under pressure, and what truly separates high-performing teams from the rest. Please welcome Brian Parsley. Brian, you've spent decades working inside sales organizations and leadership teams. What originally pulled you towards studying human behavior rather than just normal sales tactics?
Well, first off, thank you for having me. Whenever you started talking, I'm like, I want to listen to this guy. You made me sound better than I am, right? That's actually a really great question. And here's what's interesting. Everybody's journey is a little different, right? Because there's behaviors and then there's values. Behaviors is like what you do and the values are why you do it. And a lot of people in sales, and you think about human behavior, why is it that some people really excel with limited skills, and maybe someone with okay skills just knocks it out of the park? And the answer comes down to who's driven by money or recognition or winning or competitiveness versus altruism or service. And when I started in sales, it was pure grind, scripts, objection, all those frameworks only, which is very skilled, right? But then I started noticing something, that even though I would say the same words, maybe say the same things or scenarios, I would get a different response, right? So different people responded differently to the exact same thing. And that pushed me to decide, why do people do what they do, right? Not just focusing on what do I say next. And I think that when people can unlock the human behavior, that becomes the multiplier. When you understand people's motives, their fears, their filters, and then combine that with some frameworks or tactics, then you realize very quickly that there's a lot of opportunities out there that maybe you've missed.
Out of curiosity, did you study performance psychology or psychology at all, or did you learn all of this through grinding and first world experience?
Well, I'm embarrassed and proud to say I have a full 6 months in college. It just wasn't for me, but I became a ferocious student around human behavior about 20 years ago. And that's really been my focus. So the beautiful thing nowadays, it's even easier. You can get on AI and study it. You can get on Google. Obviously, growing up, we had the encyclopedia. A lot of you may not even know what that is, but it was an actual book set from A to Z to learn anything you want to learn. And nowadays, literally within a few moments, you can capture a lot of data. Now, the key is, you have different phases of learning: unaware to aware, aware to competent, competent to proficient, proficient to mastery. And what happens is, a lot of times, because we can consume data and information so quick, we believe we go from unaware to proficient. And the reality is, maybe we're just aware or maybe somewhat competent. And I think that's really where the focus needs to be. It's not knowledge. Knowledge isn't power. Knowledge, leverage, put into use, actions. That's where real power comes from.
And that's why I asked that question I did, because as a door-to-door salesman in another lifetime, we always said 4 weeks on the streets beats 4 years in the classroom. And I imagine and you with your sales background, you were in the trenches, crafting, cultivating, building this framework. And with your accolades, obviously you're doing something right. So kudos to you, my man.
Well, I can tell you the secret for everybody. I don't care how long you've been. I'm in my 50s, mid 50s. And I sit there and I look at it and I go, gosh, I still think like I'm 20. That's good, with energy and excitement and desire. But repetition's the mother of skill. And even at my age, and even with our organization, I still prospect, and I prospect on a daily basis. And the reason why I do that is, number one, we teach sales. So how can I stand in front of a group of 800 sales professionals, 5,000 sales professionals, and I say, oh, I haven't cold called for years, but I wrote a book on it? That's not giving you the authority. Everybody thinks you write a book, you're an expert. No, show me the receipts. I understand what it's like to get kicked out of a building. I know what it's like to get, if you call again, I'm going to call the police. That's why I say call until you get the restraining order. That's it. That's the rule of thumb in terms of follow up. But what happens is a lot of training that you go to is as an event based. You go to a sales kickoff or you go to an annual convention or meeting and you get all this information dumped. And yeah, it sounds really great, but all you remember 3 weeks later is the bad steak you had at the hotel, and you're hoping behaviors are going to change. Rarely is it skill, sometimes talent, most of the time behavioral shift, your willingness to do, as you say, what's difficult.
Brian, as both of us have an extensive background in sales, I find that leadership and personal development correlate extremely parallel with sales and sales ability. Now, can you please articulate as to why that is?
Why? Let me reframe and make sure I understand. You're asking me, is there a direct correlation between personal development and success at work?
Personal development, which I think correlates extremely well with leadership because you're leading yourself. Yes, success at work and becoming a better salesperson in general.
What's funny, it's really interesting that you say we're leading ourselves. I believe the opposite is true. I believe in what you're saying. I think we should lead ourselves and not expect some outside source or hope that somebody's going to guide us. But the reality is most people are paralyzed in fear, uncertainty. Everybody has these two big fears. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail? And the biggest misconception is believing that pressure creates character and we put ourselves under this pressure to sell more, it's going to make us better. But what pressure does at work is it really exposes the habits, it exposes the beliefs that you've already built. And you got to change those first if you want to achieve the outcomes that you're hoping for. So personal development is also personal accountability. And the old adage, we've heard a million times, do what you hate to do first, and whatever's most uncomfortable, knock that off, and it creates a callus and you get tougher. We all know we're supposed to work out and eat good, but if we did, we'd all have six packs and be billionaires and sit on the back of the yacht. So it's not about what we're supposed to do. I think we should be consistently improving. And here would be my takeaway. Instead of chasing perfection, focus on potential. And if you can look in the mirror and say, am I operating at my fullest potential? Personally, professionally, significant other, job. That to me is really the defining factor.
Absolutely. We can chase money until we can't chase it anymore. But at the end of the day, if your three buckets are not completely filled, something is missing. You're not going to be completely fulfilled in life: health, wealth, and love. Brian, you often talk about the human factor. Now, for someone hearing that phrase for the first time, what problem does it solve that most leadership or sales training misses?
I think if you really dig deep into human behavior, and what do I mean by that? The human factor, why and how people buy. And you understand that genetically, even though we're very sophisticated in technology and luxuries in this world, we are still innate animals, right? And if you go back 1,000 years, fight or flight kicks in. You see a saber-toothed tiger, you have this immense fear. Pain is a big motivator. You want to survive. Now, fast forward to today, let's just use sales as an example. People are still faced with, and they don't understand why, this fear. And it usually comes from uncertainty. Things like, I don't know you, I don't trust you, I'm uncertain if I make this decision, how's it going to impact me? And maybe they don't see the genetic piece of that, but what happens is they start saying things like, I need to talk to my boss, I need to think about it, give me a few days to kind of look at the agreement. These are kicking the can down the road because of this uncertainty that they don't know about. Now, here's the key. You go, why does all that matter? Because if I can focus on, well, short answer, the human behavior solves the gap between I know what to do and I can actually do it under pressure, right? But it also focuses on three levers that people ignore: emotional state, how do I feel? What do I believe, right? My environment, and where am I doing these activities? And is it determined to find my success? Like I can't sit in my car and try to cold call. I need to have dedicated time blocked off, have that environment and identity and how they see themselves in that role. Because if I see myself as just an employee, that's the output that I'm going to get. And if I see myself as the CEO of my role, I'm going to change that. And I saw a
Mhm.
really interesting acronym talking about the Girl Scouts. And if you spell out GIRL, girl, it said it stands for go getter, innovator, risk taker, leader.
Nice. I
We
like
all
that.
should sell like girls. I mean, if you think about that, it's the most powerful, and I believe women actually have a psychological advantage because they're very in tuned and understand behaviors, even the subtleties. Because 55% of body language communication is body language, only 38% is tone, and literally 7% are words. So 93% is observing what is their behavior look like and how are they saying certain things, and vice versa, how am I portraying that to my prospect or customer or significant other. This is a very powerful thing. We go through autopilot as opposed to coming in and really trying to I call slow down to speed up the process.
Absolutely. No, I love that. You brought up operating under pressure earlier. And it's funny because I had that mindset, Brian, where I like the pressure. I want the pressure. I feel like under pressure, I perform better. Little did I know I was actually mistaken. Now I have the everything is already accomplished mindset. I have the present mindset in operating without pressure. So, looking back over your career, what has been the biggest misconception leaders have about performance under pressure?
I believe that a mistake that a lot of leaders make is they um, assume people are going to step up in chaos. It is, I don't think it's a lack of willingness. I forget the study. There was a study done when someone in a group situation, if someone sees something, a medical emergency, a crime being committed, no one calls 911 because everybody assumes someone else will. We can look that up, but I mean, I thought that was fascinating, and I forget what they call that. But what happens is that as leaders, you assume being a good steward means you'll dial 911, or we're in a challenge, step up, work late, stay weekends, do things above and beyond. But we haven't done that. And we haven't done it because there's uncertainty. And we haven't done that because we haven't practiced outside of those things. It's sort of like the best time to practice a fire drill is when there's no fire, and you get this neuro pathway of knowing what to do without thinking, right? And under pressure, people don't rise to the goal. They fail under their own systems, preparation, coaching, culture. And most people behave just above the level of getting punished anyway. And unfortunately, that's human behavior.
That is extremely important what you're saying right now, Brian. When my back has been, your character will reveal itself when your back is against the wall. Are you going to cut corners? Are you going to fall under your systems? All of that will be revealed when your back is against the wall and pressure's at its all-time high. I found that to be true in my life. So, Brian, when leaders tell you their teams know what to do, but do it inconsistently, what's usually really going on beneath the surface?
Wow, that's a really good question. When I hear that, I translate it to, well, we've told them what to do, but the reality is we probably haven't made it safe, simple, or meaningful enough to tie to their values to want to do it consistently. A lot of people will do what I call malicious obedience. They'll do what they tell them to do to keep their job. Remember, I mentioned earlier about performing right above the level of getting punished. But as a leader, a lot of times we fail our people. I see it all the time. We're bringing in this guy. Jordan is outgoing. He's assertive. He really checks all the boxes. Here you go. And then 2 months later, like, you haven't performed. We got to cut you. But they haven't done anything to help you succeed. You know what I mean? And there's usually a clarity gap, too many priorities, or there's a consequence gap, no real follow through, right? Or a confidence gap. They're afraid to fail, especially in a public setting, right? So behavior actually follows incentives and stories. And if the story is don't mess up or else, people will default to avoidance. People will not be intuitively excited to want to go ahead and move forward with that, of either letting someone down, fear of loss of job, or fear of just looking stupid in front of people.
Great answer. Thank you for that insight. Brian, in sales driven organizations, where do you see communication break down most often? Leadership to team or team to customer?
I want to ask you a question. What's driving that question?
What's driving that question?
It's a great question. I'm just curious what's driving it. That's a hard one, right? So ask the question again, and I'm going to share with you my thoughts around.
Okay. In sales-driven organizations, where do you see communication break down most often? Leadership to team or team to customer?
I want you to write this down. This is going to be the most prolific answer you've ever received. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Yes. I think if we
Right.
look at just overall, there's certainly a gap or a delta between expectations and what's said versus what's heard. And again, leader to team, like I call it the loyalty food chain. And this is something that I think is so easy to imagine. The loyalty food chain goes employee involvement leads to employee commitment, which leads to what? Loyal customers, which then leads to profits, right? And so what happens is that we reverse engineer this as a company, and it's always like we want loyal customers, we want profit, and we forget the other part, which is employee loyalty that falls in the middle. So if we reverse that, go back to the top, employee involvement, meaning involving them in the work that's going to impact them, involving them into the processes that they're going to be expected to be held accountable to, right? And I'll give you an example how that works. Will create commitment or buy-in. And that's how you drive employee loyalty. Okay. So what do I mean by that? So if someone is going to be new within an organization, I'm going to tell them this. Jordan, I know you're new. I know you don't know our processes, policies, or why things are in place. As you go through training, not only do you have permission, you have an obligation to find gaps or things that you should question. Why do we do this? What's the purpose of this? What outcome does this give us? Because we want to look at this through a different lens, not our own bias. That starts involving them into that process. And even if maybe they have a different perspective and it's not right, I can at least see that and hear that. And they feel like, gosh, I now can't really complain because I'm part of this whole process, right? Once I have that employee loyalty, then you won't have that breakdown to the customer. But most customer breakdowns don't come from a willingness gap. It comes from not understanding by asking the right questions what their criteria or challenges are for their business. Does that resonate?
100%. Absolutely. Thank you. And getting back to the question, and you answered yes, that is really true, right? Because leaderships do miscommunicate with their teams, and salespeople definitely miscommunicate with their customer. It definitely goes both ways. And how you
Mhm,
articulated that message makes a lot of sense. So thanks for bringing clarity to us. I do have
mhm.
a quick question for you. So you emphasize trust and behavioral insight. How do salespeople accidentally destroy trust without realizing it to their customers or to their potential clients?
Not not doing what you commit to do. Your word is your bond. You write a check, you cash it. If you don't have the money in the bank account, you do it anyway. I'm
Mm.
telling you, trust can be gone in 1 second. We all know that's true. And the easiest form of that is doing what you say. And even in cold calling, hey, Jordan, I know you're busy. If I don't hear back from you, I assume you want me to call you next Tuesday. By me just going through that one activity, it's actually building trust with you subconsciously.
And plus, you are stating what they believe to be true. You're busy. I am busy. Like, yeah, go ahead and call me back next week, right?
That's exactly it.
Brian, what's one leadership behavior you see that feels productive, but actually undermines sales performance long term?
I it's really interesting you bring that up because when I work with leaders, not just sales leaders, just in general leadership, I ask them this question. What percent of your time this week and this month was spent working on day-to-day operational tasks versus developing your people? And you already know what the answer is going to be. Overwhelmingly, it's the day-to-day grind. And yet we wonder why we're not developing people. They're not excited. They're leaving for an extra $2 an hour, an extra 5,000 a year, whatever it is. It's because there's a misalignment to people aren't leaving for the $3. They're leaving because one of three basic human needs are not met. They don't feel important, they don't feel valued, or they don't feel appreciated. And quite honestly, that's a currency that's accepted around the world. So when you mistake working in the business versus working on the business, that's that gap. And that's where that shows up.
Got you. That makes perfect sense. Brian, you work with high performing sales cultures, and culture is a word that gets thrown around a lot. Now, in your experience, how do you actually measure or diagnose a company's culture?
Well, culture is such a general word. And within that culture, you have things like EQ, which by the way, EQ can be learned. You don't have to be born with EQ. right? But there's two things that drive, I think, actions within an organization. One are behaviors. That's how you choose to communicate. And there are assessments out there. We're agnostic when it comes to assessments, but we like the DISC. I think it's a very powerful tool to identify the four major archetypes of how people communicate. And then you got values. And the values are the reasons why you do what you do before. And I think once you understand your own strengths, then it's going to be a lot easier for you to be aware of other people's tendencies, right? And you can adapt to that. High performance sales cultures are really about consistency, and it can have the same expectations, same standards, same feedback, and they're okay with that because leadership consistency is always the key. Always the key. Layoffs, leadership consistent. Growth, leadership consistent. They're not panicking. They're not over celebrating. And when you have someone like that, you become what I call the real leader. And the real leader definition is when someone's willing to follow you, not your title. If you have to say you're in charge, you're not in charge. And that's one of
Mm.
the biggest mistakes that people make in leadership.
Oh, that is so true, my friend. I love that so much. Not to bring up Game of Thrones, but there was a character on there. I forget his name. It's been so long, but nonetheless, he didn't know that he was like supposed to be the king. But his leadership capabilities, the way he talked to people, he was extremely fair. People wanted to follow him, not because of his title, but because of the character that he cultivated.
Yeah.
Brian, earlier in the podcast, you're in this conversation, you said people do things for different reasons, which is extremely valid. But when it comes to motivation and human behavior and the driving force behind our actions, what do you feel like is the most powerful based on your experience? In the very beginning, you said people are financially driven. They're driven because of their family. They're driven because of different types of beliefs or motivations. And in your experience, what do you feel like is the most powerful driving force to get someone to take action?
Pain. Pain is the biggest trigger for all of us to take action. Best exercise program for a 50-year-old male, heart attack, right?
Dang.
Come home and your clothes are in the front lawn, maybe relationship focus, right? Everything we do is our need to avoid pain. Now, those are extremes. So the key is how can you associate pain to not doing something before it actually happens? And that's the psychological trick. So if, it's easy to say, I want to make more money. You can even say, I need to make more money or get healthier or exercise. But unless you associate the pain of not doing that to it, you're not going to be motivated because it comes down to discipline. Consistency is discipline, and discipline is driven by belief of what it is that you're going to achieve or what it is that you're going to avoid. And by far, that's why if you look at sales, a lot of salespeople are very cyclical in their numbers. And it's because they get tremendous lift and confidence and they get lazy. They get
Mm.
comfortable, and comfort destroys progress. You get sync rate. Next thing you know, they're back down and maybe they're on a PIP, which that's a whole other conversation because I'm very anti PIP.
Why is that?
I'm anti PIP because they don't work. I literally just posted this on LinkedIn that PIPs are paid vacations. I mean, they're like basically looking for other jobs. A PIP is because the leader didn't check in enough throughout that year or time frame to be able to redirect, to see the gaps, to understand what's even driving them or motivating them. If I don't understand what criteria you're using to judge whether or not you feel fulfilled at work, how can I expect you to just come to work to help me buy a new Ferrari? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But
Yeah, exactly.
nobody's going to do that. So if I can say, you want to make money? Great. It's recognition? Great. It's feeling valued? Great. What does that look like? Define that. Tell me if you had that, what would that do for you? And then once a quarter, I'm just spot checking back with you, pulse checking. Hey, you said you wanted money. You defined it as this, and this is what we talked about. Is that right? Yeah. Well, you haven't done it. And I want to make sure you still get that. What can I do to help you? You don't have to fire anyone. People fire themselves because you're focusing on the things that are most important to them.
In your experience, how often should high performing sales or even teams culture meet?
Well, the secondary question to that would be, how do you define high performance? The other the other question is that people have meetings to talk about the meeting. People are meetinged out, just like they got sick and tired of hearing the word pivot for 2 years straight on Zoom. So I think what you have to identify in our culture, What is most important in terms of behavioral shifts or behavioral maintenance or behavioral goals? And remember I said employee involvement leads to that employee commitment or buy-in. So how are we involving our people? Because if you've been on any corporate Zoom meeting, here's what you see. Look at me. We're on Zoom. People aren't even paying attention.
Right.
But if you listen with the intent to teach, so if I'm involving my team and I say, look, one of you next week are going to teach this to the group, you think that's going to change that one comment at the beginning? Do you think that's going to change engagement?
Absolutely. Massively.
Because it only takes one time for someone to be embarrassed. That's pain. They'll change that behavior. And it's not about humiliation. It's about setting expectations and holding them accountable to that. And if that doesn't work for you, I totally get it. You know what we should do? We should create Office Survivor. Every week on Friday, everybody they bring all their shit to the parking lot and we vote out the weakest link. Tell me
Ooh.
that would not improve performance. You
I
know
was
what I
gonna say,
mean?
talk about a sales culture. Yeah, I would love that.
Well, it's just about nobody wants that pain. If we have a meeting and it starts at 9 and you rock up at 9:05, I'm not gonna be rude. I'm just gonna say, "Jordan, the meeting started at 9. You don't need to attend. I'll talk to you afterwards."
I
Do you
respect
think
that.
any what message is that sending? That is strong leadership that's consistent, and it's not mean. It's not and that's the problem. We have a lot of folks nowadays that see that as microaggression. It's not. It's holding you accountable to your own bullshit. The world doesn't revolve around you or me. It's moving forward. And our job is to be aware and be in control of our own destiny. Every person, receptionist, salesperson, sales manager, I don't care what your title, should see themselves as the CEO of their own company because that's exactly what you're doing.
That is so valuable. I wish I had that mindset in previous roles years ago, but I think if everyone did embody that mindset, they would take their job more seriously and the effectiveness of their output would skyrocket. That needs to be a mantra in everyone's head. You are the CEO of your own position. I love that.
That's it. And that's a mindset because it goes back to what we call internal locus of control, where I'm in charge of my destiny. What must I do? How can I change? Not blaming marketing, the economy. What do you think? Do you think my electric company cares the economy's bad? No, they want their money. And my job and my role is to make that happen. And there are days, sales is not for the weak.
Mm.
Nothing happens, nothing, not this mic, not this computer, not my Yeti cup. Nothing is done in operations or a company until a sale is made. That's the importance of sales. The problem is that people still don't see it as such an integral part of society as a career. And you're either passionate about serving and giving and making it happen. Not every day. I said it's not for the faint of heart for a reason, because there are days that I question why am I prospecting? Hangups, no thank you, no interest, no interest. We didn't even talk, right? But
Mhm.
instead of looking at that and blaming that and being down, I say, okay, what's not working? What message must I change? Maybe it's the timing. Maybe it's how I said it. Maybe it's the follow up and then split test and figure it out. Because then, as much as business might suck for week prospecting and you feel like it's never going to end, then you start hitting wins. And then that's a direct, now it's like, I love my job, and everything shifts because of our own mindset, not because the economy.
Brian, you and I could talk for hours on this topic, my friend. I got into sales at 18 years old, and I do not regret it. I think it is by far the best thing, the best choice I could have made. For anyone that did not go to college, I think sales teaches you so much about business, so much about yourself. You grow spiritually, you grow mentally. It is such a mental battle getting told no, 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 thank you, not interested. But like you said, Brian, when you push through, it is spiritual growth. That is mental growth. And then when you actually win, when you make a sale, you provide for your family. Nobody can take that away from you. And that's where real confidence is built. And I, as you can
So,
tell, I'm
so
passionate about this.
So here's what I do. I practice hearing no. I actually recorded a podcast won't work. I practice getting no's. I go to Starbucks. I just did this yesterday. Every time I rock up, I order my coffee and then I say, "Can I get my 25% discount?" I hear no every time, right? Now, the one I was going to play you is kind of silly. She's like, "Oh no, no, the 25% discount was yesterday." you know,
That's funny.
and she played it off. But sometimes I get a absolutely not. No. And even though I hear no's, kind of happy no's, bad no's, what's most intriguing to me is I've never died after I walked out and heard a no. So I'm training my mind that no's are not necessarily bad things. No's are just part of the process. So I detach myself from the outcome, which is what I want. And what I'm really trying to do is just focus on what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis.
And if you're in a leadership position, if you own a business, you're gonna have to get comfortable with hearing the word no, right? That's entrepreneurship, that is business. Not everyone's gonna say yes. And I want to add one more thing. You brought up the importance of sales in the umbrella of a business. It is the driving force behind all revenue. You can hate salespeople, you can hate sales, but we make shit happen. And I love salespeople.
hmm Well, so if you think about when you start talking about hearing no's, objections, challenges, pressure in sales, and this is true with leadership as well. But if we look at just human nature in general, pressure a lot of times shrinks people's own perspectives, right? They go from strategic and surgical on how I'm doing things to survival, serving the customers to becoming myopically focused on protecting themselves and their own ego, right? And you see more reactive emotional emails, discounting, hiding pipelines, avoiding hard conversations. You know how many times I talk to salespeople and when they're cold calling, they're like mentally going, I hope she doesn't answer. I hope I get a voicemail.
For
And
sure.
they underestimate themselves and they put different pressures on themselves that don't need to be there. And I think that when you go into any relationship that's new or even an existing one with, say, your leader or a coworker or a customer, and you assume that they feel that same way, that's a problem. And what happens is unintentionally you amplify your own insecurities into that conversation.
Brian, if a leader is listening today could make one shift in how they lead their team under pressure when their backs are against the wall, what would you recommend they start with?
That's a really great question. And I think we have to shift from how do I get more out of my people to how do I get more from my people so they can perform under pressure. So you communicate clarity. What matters now? What can wait? What looks good this week, not just this quarter or this year, because it becomes daunting to look at quarterly goals or annual goals, right? You definitely need to do quarterly business reviews, but weekly and even bringing it down to daily, those wins build up. Here's something else. When people are hit with pressure, which can cause uncertainty, all we have to do is normalize that. Talk openly about, look, it's not that you're not able to handle something under pressure. It's you're not prepared. No different than have you ever had an argument and 20 minutes later you said, if only I would have thought that, that'd have been the zinger. Just remove the shame about asking. Remember I said earlier, I talked about, not only do you have permission, you have an obligation to bring up this, even if it's uncomfortable. Gallup did a survey. This is a really great point. Gallup did a survey and they found that over 80% of employees craved feedback from their leader, even if it was negative. Now, it didn't say that they like to be yelled at, but it said that they craved feedback even if it wasn't positive. Now, that means people want to grow. People want to do better. They don't know better. And that one shift alone can change your posture from commander, manager to partner, and performance will follow that energy because we all have the same goals. We just have different responsibilities. We don't need titles. You'll never hear me say, she works for me. It's my coworker because we all are in this together. And I'm not perfect, dude. I'm a broken human being. I would say I'm a terrible leader, but that's only because I'm trying to set a standard that is higher than what I believe I am at this point.
Absolutely. And that is one of the best ways to grow, right? We'll end it on this question here. For leaders who want better results without burning out their people, where should they focus first? Systems, skills, or self awareness?
I think all three are really important. The one I would start with is self-awareness because you can build systems and skills through, regular things, meetings, online, people like me. But a leader without self-awareness will actually design the wrong systems and teach the wrong skills. And guess what they do at the end of that, Jordan? They blame the team. And once you see your patterns as a leader, how you react to situations, meaning if something happens, are you quick? And that's not necessarily a good thing, right?
Hmm.
Or are you too slow to respond? That's not a good thing. How do you communicate that? Then you can design systems that protect you from your weaknesses and then amplify your strengths. But remember, overuse of your strengths is also perceived as a weakness. Like, I believe one of my greatest strengths is my ability to talk myself out of problems. Overuse of that, don't know when to stop talking. And when you layer in skills and you layer that on top of processes so the culture doesn't depend on one person's mood or one person's skill level, that's when you're going to see the greatest success within a business.
Got you. Brian, any closing notes? Where can the people find you?
Well, they can find me in the World Wide Web. If you just Google Brian Parsley, I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn. And you know, it's also really unique. My mobile number is on both those channels as well. And I love connecting with followers and people, and I respond to comments. And that's something that I believe is overlooked. And is that a pain? And people sometimes will say, don't you get a lot of sales calls? Yeah, I'll try to listen to a pitch. And if they suck, all I have to say is, look, don't be discouraged, call other people. And they usually do. And so I'm just passionate about meeting people, understanding stories, and if we can add value, wonderful.
Absolutely. Brian, it was a pleasure having you. I got a lot of value, a lot of insights from this. I'm sure the audience did as well. Audience, thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks.